Subscribe for more exciting stories. The city was alive with lights, laughter, and secrets, but none of that mattered to Dominic Moretti. As the notorious Mafia boss of New York's underworld, he had a reputation that kept most people trembling in their shoes. Tonight, however, Dominic faced a problem no one in his criminal empire could fix. His brother's wedding was in 2 days, and there was no date for the groom. Dominic had promised his family he would handle it, and unlike his usual operations, this was not a matter of threats or power, it required finesse, charm, and the right person to make an impression. Dominic leaned against the polished marble counter of his penthouse, staring out at the city below. He had already dismissed half a dozen suggestions from his closest associates, each more ridiculous than the last. A socialite who was only interested in his wealth, a model who could barely string 2 sentences together, a businesswoman who looked at him with thinly veiled suspicion, none of them fit. His brother, Matteo, deserved someone remarkable, someone who could survive in a room full of family, gossip, and, secretly, Dominic himself. A soft chime echoed from his phone. Dominic glanced down to see a message from Lila, his assistant, who had a talent for finding the most unexpected people. "I have one last idea, boss. You might not like it, but it's worth considering." Dominic smirked, intrigued. Lila always had a way of surprising him, and for once, he allowed curiosity to outweigh skepticism. By the time he arrived at the upscale cafe where Lila had arranged the meeting, Dominic was already rehearsing the words he would say to reject whoever she had brought. The bell above the door jingled as he stepped inside, and he immediately noticed her. She wasn't a model, a socialite, or anyone remotely close to the glamorous type Dominic usually encountered. She was ordinary, almost strikingly so, with chestnut hair loosely tied back, glasses perched on her nose, and an air of calm confidence that somehow made the room feel quieter around her. Dominic froze for a moment, studying her. He couldn't quite place why she seemed so familiar, yet utterly unexpected. "You must be the candidate," he said, keeping his voice neutral. She smiled faintly, not intimidated, not impressed, just curious. "I suppose that depends on what you're looking for," she replied. There was a spark in her eyes, a kind of quiet defiance, that Dominic hadn't seen in anyone, especially not someone who might agree to accompany a Mafia family to a wedding. Lila nudged him from behind. "Trust me," she whispered. "She's perfect. And she's the last person you expected." Dominic's lips curved into a slow smile. Perhaps this problem was going to solve itself in a way he hadn't anticipated. Little did he know, this simple meeting would spiral into a series of events that would challenge everything he thought he knew about control, family, and desire. The night was just beginning, and Dominic Moretti was about to discover that the last person anyone expected could change his world entirely. The morning after the cafe meeting, Dominic couldn't shake the image of her from his mind. Her name, he learned, was Emma Carlyle, and despite her ordinary appearance, there was something magnetic about her, an intelligence, a wit, and a fearlessness that made Dominic uncomfortable in the best possible way. He had dealt with countless people who bowed to his power, who flattered and smiled just to gain favor, but Emma had neither flattery nor fear in her eyes. She treated him like any other man, and yet, she had an air that suggested she understood more than she let on. Dominic returned to his penthouse, pacing as he considered the situation. Bringing her to Matteo's wedding was risky, not only for appearances, but for the delicate dynamics of their family. The Morettis were traditional, proud, and sharp-tongued. Every gesture, every look, every conversation would be scrutinized. Yet Dominic couldn't deny that Emma seemed the only person who could hold her own in that world without being intimidated or falling prey to superficial charm. She was the last person anyone would expect, yes, but maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what the wedding needed. He picked up his phone and dialed her number. The line rang twice before she answered, her voice calm, steady, and just as disarming as it had been in person. "Hello, Emma," Dominic said, keeping his tone even, though there was a tension in his chest he rarely felt. "I need to talk to you about the wedding." There was a pause. "About being a date?" she asked, with a hint of amusement. "Yes," he admitted, though the word sounded heavier than he expected. "It's not just any wedding. It's my brother's, and," he hesitated. Admitting the truth, that he was a Mafia boss, wasn't necessary yet, and he didn't want to scare her away. "I need someone remarkable by my side. I think that someone could be you." Emma didn't laugh, nor did she hesitate. Instead, she said, "I'll do it. But you should know, I don't play the part you're probably expecting. I won't be intimidated, I won't flinch, and I won't lie to fit in." Her words made Dominic sit back, a rare smile tugging at his lips. She wasn't naive, and she wasn't afraid, two qualities that were almost unheard of in his circles. "I wouldn't want you to," he said. "I don't need someone to play a part. Just be yourself." The wedding preparations were chaotic. Matteo had a long list of demands, from decorations to guest seating, and Dominic had to navigate the delicate politics of his family while also ensuring Emma would be prepared for the event. He scheduled meetings with the caterers, the florist, and even the photographer, all while occasionally checking on Emma, who had agreed to spend time with him to understand the family, the dynamics, and the expectations. As the days passed, Dominic noticed little things about Emma that unsettled him in ways he couldn't explain. She asked questions no one else dared, observed details that went unnoticed, and didn't flinch when a waiter dropped a tray of champagne or when an aunt criticized a minor detail of the decorations. She had a quiet confidence, and it was growing more impossible to ignore the effect she had on him. Dominic Moretti, the man who controlled an empire, found himself looking forward to her insights, her laughter, and even her subtle teasing. One evening, after a long day of wedding planning, Dominic found himself walking with her along the balcony of his penthouse. The city lights stretched below, sparkling like 1,000 tiny stars, and the cool night air was a welcome relief from the tension of the day. Emma leaned slightly on the railing, her eyes reflecting the glow of the skyline. "You know," she said, her voice light but thoughtful, "I never expected to be here. And yet, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Dominic felt a pang of something he couldn't name, a mixture of admiration, protectiveness, and a growing fascination. "I think you fit in better than anyone would expect," he said. "Most people would crumble under the pressure of my world. You thrive." Emma glanced at him, a playful smirk on her lips. "Thrive? Huh, that sounds dangerous coming from you." "Dangerous," Dominic repeated, raising an eyebrow. "I don't see the danger. I see honesty, courage, and a rare ability to notice things others ignore." His voice softened slightly, though he didn't want her to see the shift. Vulnerability was a weakness he rarely allowed, but with Emma, he couldn't hide it completely. Over the next few days, Dominic arranged for her to meet his family, carefully preparing her for the dynamics of the Morettis. Matteo was charming and enthusiastic, doting on Dominic's choice of a date without suspicion. Their mother, Isabella, was sharp and perceptive, asking questions that could make anyone uncomfortable, but Emma answered with poise, wit, and a natural grace that impressed even the most critical family members. Yet the true test came in the form of Matteo's friends and extended family, some of whom were unaware of Dominic's reputation. As Emma navigated conversations about business, lifestyle, and family politics, she displayed a rare mix of intelligence and humor that charmed everyone she met. Dominic watched from a distance, a mixture of pride and an unfamiliar warmth swelling in his chest. He had brought her into this world expecting resistance, awkwardness, or at least some discomfort, but instead, she moved through it with the confidence of someone who belonged. By the night before the wedding, Dominic realized something startling. The simple task of bringing a date had become more than just a responsibility. Emma had shifted something within him, challenged him, intrigued him, and made him reconsider the walls he had built around himself. For the first time in years, he felt uncertain about how the next day would unfold, not because of threats or business dealings, but because of Emma. She was unpredictable, clever, and utterly captivating. As he stood in his study, preparing his suit for the wedding, Dominic allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. The Mafia world he ruled was built on control, fear, and precision, but Emma defied all of that. She was the last person anyone expected, yes, but now he understood something important. The unexpected could be powerful, transformative, and dangerously irresistible. And Dominic Moretti, for the first time in his life, was willing to let himself be vulnerable. The morning of Matteo's wedding arrived with a mix of anticipation and tension. The Moretti mansion was buzzing with activity, florists arranging delicate roses, chefs putting finishing touches on the elaborate menu, and family members bustling around in a chaotic harmony that only a wedding of this scale could produce. Dominic, usually the calm eye of any storm, felt a flicker of nerves. It wasn't for his brother. Matteo had handled countless events with charm and ease, but for Emma. She was stepping into a world of wealth, power, and scrutiny, and Dominic knew the pressure would be immense. Emma, meanwhile, was surprisingly calm. She moved through the preparation with quiet grace, taking in the surroundings, asking insightful questions, and even offering suggestions that Dominic had overlooked. She had chosen a stunning but understated dress, one that highlighted her natural elegance without screaming for attention. Her hair was styled simply, yet every movement she made radiated poise. Dominic couldn't help but notice how perfectly she fit into the extravagant setting, not because she tried, but because she belonged there in her own way. As they arrived at the ceremony, the crowd's attention inevitably turned toward Dominic and Emma. Whispers rippled through the guests, some curious, some skeptical, but Emma held her head high, walking beside Dominic with confidence. Her presence alone seemed to command respect without demanding it. Dominic caught the eyes of several family members, who shot him knowing looks, silently questioning his choice. He ignored them, focusing on Emma, who offered him a small, reassuring smile. That smile, simple as it was, made his chest tighten in a way he hadn't expected. The ceremony began, and Matteo stood at the altar, radiant and excited. Emma took her seat with Dominic beside her, observing the proceedings with a keen eye. She noticed the subtle glances between family members, the hidden tensions, and even the nervous energy of the bridesmaids. Dominic found himself marveling at how perceptive she was, how she seemed to understand the delicate web of relationships surrounding them. It was as though she could read the room better than anyone else, and that skill, so rare and yet so effortless, made her all the more captivating in Dominic's eyes. During the reception, the real test began. High-profile guests mingled, many curious about Dominic's companion. Emma navigated each conversation with wit and charm, deflecting intrusive questions without offense and engaging even the most skeptical attendees. Dominic watched, partly impressed, partly aware of a stirring in his chest he didn't quite understand. She laughed at the right moments, offered insightful commentary, and somehow made even the most pretentious guests feel at ease. By the time dinner was served, Emma had not only survived the scrutiny but had become the unexpected highlight of the evening. Later, as the night progressed, Dominic found himself walking beside her on the terrace. The city lights twinkled below, and a soft breeze carried the faint scent of flowers from the gardens. For a moment, there was no family, no business, no expectations, just the two of them. "You handled that better than anyone could have expected," Dominic said quietly, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Emma looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "It wasn't about handling it. I just didn't let it scare me. And you made it easier, Dominic. You didn't smother me or assume I couldn't keep up. You treated me like an equal." Her words struck him. Dominic was used to people relying on him, fearing him, or flattering him. Emma's respect had been earned through honesty and presence, not intimidation or power. It was intoxicating. "You're remarkable," he admitted, the words feeling strange but necessary. Most people wouldn't survive in that environment without faltering. Emma smiled softly, a hint of warmth in her gaze. "Maybe I just like a challenge." Dominic's lips curved into a small, genuine smile. She was fearless, clever, and utterly captivating. And yet, he knew there was more to her than met the eye, layers of strength, intelligence, and perhaps secrets she had yet to reveal. The thought both thrilled and unnerved him. The evening continued with music, laughter, and dancing. Emma joined in with ease, her presence drawing admiration from everyone without her trying. Dominic, watching her, felt an unfamiliar vulnerability. He was used to controlling situations, manipulating outcomes, and ensuring that everything around him aligned with his expectations. But Emma was different. She defied expectation at every turn, and he realized he was letting himself be drawn in, despite the risks. As the night grew late, Dominic and Emma found themselves alone near the edge of the terrace. The city stretched beneath them, alive and glittering. Dominic's hand brushed hers, almost accidentally, but the touch lingered, charged with unspoken tension. He could feel the weight of desire, curiosity, and something deeper that neither of them had fully acknowledged. "Dominic," Emma began, her voice soft but certain. "Tonight, I felt something different. Not fear, not judgment, but excitement. And maybe a little danger." Dominic's heart skipped a beat. "Danger can be exhilarating," he murmured, his voice low, deliberate. He had spent years controlling fear, power, and loyalty, but Emma was teaching him a new lesson, one about unpredictability, trust, and the thrill of surrendering control, if only for a moment. Before either could speak further, a sudden commotion erupted from the ballroom. Matteo's cousin, known for his brash behavior and habit of stirring drama, had spilled a glass of wine across the dance floor, creating a chain reaction of startled guests. Dominic instinctively moved to Emma's side, shielding her with a protective hand, though she didn't need it. She simply smiled, unshaken, as if to say she could handle herself. Dominic felt a mixture of pride and something more profound. Emma wasn't just surviving in his world, she was thriving, and she was doing it with a confidence that challenged him, intrigued him, and perhaps, for the first time, made him consider letting someone in entirely. As the wedding drew to a close, Dominic realized that Emma had changed everything. She had turned a simple obligation, a favor for his brother, into a night of revelation, connection, and undeniable chemistry. The last person anyone expected had not only survived the wedding, she had commanded it, captured attention, and, most importantly, left Dominic questioning everything he thought he knew about control, desire, and the unpredictable nature of the human heart. Walking her to her car, Dominic felt a pull he couldn't resist. "Emma," he said, his voice softer than usual, "thank you, for tonight. For being yourself. For surprising me." She looked up at him, her eyes catching the last glimmer of city light. "I didn't do it to surprise you, Dominic. I just did what I always do. Be honest, be present, and maybe make an impression." Dominic smiled, a rare warmth spreading through him. "You've done more than that. You've changed my perspective. And I don't know if I'm ready for the consequences yet." Emma laughed softly, the sound echoing in the night air. "Consequences can be fun, Dominic. Especially when they're worth it." As she drove away, Dominic stood in the glow of the city lights, realizing that this was only the beginning. Emma had arrived unexpectedly, shaken his world, and left him craving more. The Mafia boss who had ruled with fear and power now found himself entangled in feelings he couldn't control, and he had no idea how far this unexpected connection would take him. The morning after the wedding, Dominic awoke in his penthouse with the city sprawled beneath him, glittering like a million tiny secrets. He should have felt triumphant. His brother's wedding had gone perfectly, and Emma had handled the entire event with a poise and intelligence that stunned him, but instead, a restless energy churned inside him. The image of her calm, confident smile lingered in his mind. He realized he hadn't just been impressed by her ability to navigate the chaos, he had been captivated. And that realization made him uncomfortable in ways he hadn't felt in years. Emma, for her part, had returned to her life with a sense of curiosity she couldn't shake. She had survived a world she barely understood, facing a family notorious for their power and temper, and she had done it without compromise. But what she couldn't stop thinking about was Dominic. There was something magnetic about him, dangerous yet restrained, commanding yet surprisingly vulnerable when he let his guard down around her. She had expected arrogance, intimidation, maybe even disdain. Instead, she found complexity, and that complexity intrigued her far more than it should have. Dominic called her later that day. "Emma," he said, trying to keep his tone casual, "I wanted to thank you again. You handled everything perfectly." Emma's laughter over the phone was soft, teasing, yet confident. "I already told you, Dominic, I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I just survived. But thank you. I think you did more than survive," he replied, a tension in his voice he didn't intend. "You stood out. You changed the dynamic of the entire night." He paused, considering how to phrase the next part. "I didn't expect to enjoy having you there as much as I did." There was silence on the line, a pause that made his chest tighten. "Neither did I," Emma admitted, her voice soft. "But I suppose some surprises are inevitable." That evening, Dominic found himself wandering the streets of the city, unable to focus on business, his empire, or even his carefully constructed plans. Thoughts of Emma filled his mind, the way she had handled family, the way she had laughed when he teased her, the way her eyes had held him accountable without saying a word. He realized he had spent his life controlling every detail around him, yet Emma had challenged that control without even trying. She had become a variable he couldn't predict, and he wasn't sure if he wanted to. The next day, Dominic arranged to meet her at a quiet, upscale cafe. He needed to see her, to hear her voice, to experience the subtle chaos she brought into his meticulously ordered world. When she arrived, she smiled as if nothing had changed, yet there was a spark in her eyes, a mix of curiosity and caution. "You summoned me, Dominic. What's this about?" she asked, sipping her coffee with that calm assurance that both irritated and fascinated him. "I wanted to see you," he said, keeping his tone steady even though his pulse raced. "And to talk about the wedding, and what comes next." Emma raised an eyebrow, leaning back slightly. "Next?" she asked, her tone light but probing. "Are we talking about another social event, or are you referring to this?" She gestured subtly between them, indicating the unspoken tension that had grown since the wedding. Dominic felt a rare vulnerability. He wasn't used to someone speaking so directly, to calling out what everyone else tiptoed around. "This," he admitted, "isn't something I'm accustomed to. I don't usually let people in. But you've changed that. And I don't know if I'm ready for it, yet I can't ignore it." Emma studied him carefully, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Dominic, you're a man used to control. I can see that, but I'm not a problem to solve, nor a challenge to conquer. I'm me, and if you want to explore this, it has to be mutual. No games, no illusions." Her words struck him. Dominic was used to manipulation, strategy, and winning by outsmarting others. Emma didn't operate on those terms. She demanded honesty, presence, and authenticity, qualities that were both foreign and intoxicating to him. He realized she wasn't just challenging him emotionally, she was challenging the very foundation of how he interacted with the world. Over the following days, Dominic found excuses to see her, from casual meetings under the guise of business discussions to shared dinners that quickly turned into long conversations about life, family, and ambition. Every encounter deepened the connection, creating a tension that neither could ignore. Yet both were aware of the complications: Dominic's dangerous world, the scrutiny of his family, and the unpredictability of the empire he controlled. One evening, as they walked along the river, the city lights reflecting on the water, Dominic felt an impulse he couldn't resist. He stopped, turning to face her fully. "Emma, I have to be honest. Whatever this is between us, it's unexpected, and I don't know where it will lead. But I know I want it." Emma's eyes met his, unwavering, fearless. "Dominic, you're not just asking me to step into your world. You're asking me to trust you with mine. And that's a lot. But I'm not afraid. I want to see where this goes to." For the first time, Dominic felt a sense of equality, someone who could challenge him, match him, and yet complement him. The pull between them was undeniable, electric, and frightening in its intensity. He realized he had never been vulnerable in this way, never allowed someone to see the layers beneath the power, the control, and the fear he wielded daily. Over the next few days, Dominic introduced Emma more subtly to his inner circle, testing her ability to navigate his dangerous world. Friends, allies, and even rivals noticed her presence, but Emma remained composed, intelligent, and unflinchingly herself. Dominic watched with a mixture of pride and desire, realizing that she wasn't just surviving in his world, she was thriving. And yet, as much as Dominic wanted to surrender to the connection between them, he also knew the dangers. His world was unforgiving, filled with enemies, betrayals, and moral compromises. Introducing Emma further could expose her to risk, and yet, the thought of keeping her at a distance felt impossible. She had become not just a companion, but a force that challenged his life, his rules, and his heart. That night, alone in his study, Dominic reflected on the events of the past week. Emma had entered his life unexpectedly, survived a chaotic family wedding, and now occupied every corner of his thoughts. She was the last person anyone expected to affect him, yet she had done so profoundly. He knew that what was coming next would test them both, loyalties, boundaries, and desires, but he also knew one undeniable truth: Emma Carlyle had changed everything. And Dominic Moretti, the man who ruled with power, fear, and precision, was ready to risk it all, because for the first time, he had no desire to control the outcome. The days following the wedding were charged with an unspoken tension. Dominic found himself constantly thinking about Emma, replaying her words, her laughter, and the subtle glances they had exchanged on the terrace that night. It wasn't just admiration anymore, it was something deeper, something dangerous to acknowledge. In his world, desire was a luxury, and attachments were liabilities, but with Emma, he couldn't stop himself from wanting more. She had infiltrated his carefully controlled life, dismantling the walls he had built around his heart, piece by piece. Emma, meanwhile, was adjusting to the peculiar rhythm of Dominic's life. She had survived the scrutiny of his family and the chaos of a mafia wedding, but now she had to navigate the subtle intricacies of his empire. Business meetings, strategy sessions, and casual encounters with people who held power and influence in New York's underground world became part of her unexpected reality. And through it all, she maintained her calm, her intelligence, and a quiet charm that drew both respect and curiosity. Dominic watched her closely, amazed at how she thrived in a world designed to intimidate most. One evening, Dominic invited her to his private office. The room was dimly lit, lined with books and mementos from his life, a space that reflected both power and solitude. He gestured for her to sit, and she did, without hesitation, as if she belonged there. Dominic, unaccustomed to vulnerability, struggled with what to say. "Emma," he began, "you've changed everything. Not just the wedding, not just how I feel about you, but the way I see my own world. I thought I controlled everything, but you've reminded me that there are forces beyond control, unexpected forces, like you." Emma tilted her head, studying him carefully. "Dominic, I don't intend to change you. I just exist in your world honestly. I don't hide, I don't play games, and I certainly don't fear you. That's all." Her words, simple as they were, struck Dominic with the force of truth. He had spent years commanding respect through fear, intimidation, and careful calculation. Emma, with her honesty and presence, had bypassed all of that. She had not only earned his attention but had also made him reconsider the value of openness, trust, and vulnerability. Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden phone call. Dominic answered, his face tightening as he listened. The voice on the other end belonged to one of his lieutenants, a trusted man who rarely delivered bad news lightly. Something had gone wrong at one of Dominic's operations, a rival gang making a move that could destabilize his empire if not handled immediately. Dominic hung up, his expression dark, and looked at Emma. "I need to handle this," he said, his tone sharp, yet not without apology. "It's dangerous, and I can't risk you being caught up in it." Emma didn't flinch. "Then I'll stay out of it," she said firmly, her calm confidence unwavering. "But Dominic, you don't have to face everything alone. Even someone like me can help." Her words surprised him. Dominic was used to dealing with crises alone, relying only on those he trusted completely. Emma's offer wasn't naive, it was intentional, courageous, and perhaps reckless, but in a way that intrigued him. He found himself considering the possibility, imagining her intelligence and presence as an asset rather than a risk. By the time the night fell, Dominic had resolved the immediate threat. He returned to his penthouse, his mind still buzzing with tension and thoughts of Emma. She was waiting, as usual, calm and poised, seemingly unaffected by the chaos that had consumed his day. Her presence was grounding, a contrast to the volatility of his world. He walked over to her, closing the distance between them. "Emma, he stopped, realizing that words were insufficient. She understood him in ways most people never could, not just as a man, but as Dominic Moretti, the Mafia boss, the strategist, the man feared and respected across the city. Emma smiled, a subtle, knowing smile. "You don't have to explain," she said softly. "I already know." Her words ignited something within him, a mix of desire, admiration, and fear. Dominic had never let anyone in completely, and the thought of surrendering even a fraction of control was both terrifying and exhilarating. He found himself leaning closer, drawn to her presence, captivated by the way she made him feel both powerful and vulnerable simultaneously. Over the next few days, their connection deepened. Private dinners, late-night walks, and quiet conversations became the foundation of a growing intimacy. Dominic discovered aspects of himself he had buried long ago, the desire for companionship, the need for trust, and the willingness to risk everything for something, or someone, worth it. Emma, in turn, discovered the man behind the Mafia boss, complex, intelligent, and capable of immense loyalty and tenderness when he allowed himself to be human. Yet danger lingered at the edges of their growing bond. Dominic's enemies were always watching, waiting for the slightest misstep to exploit. And Emma, despite her courage and insight, was stepping into a world where a single mistake could have devastating consequences. Every moment together was tinged with tension, a constant reminder that their connection existed in a realm of risk and uncertainty. One evening, as they stood on the balcony overlooking the city, Dominic's hand found hers. The contact was light, deliberate, and full of unspoken meaning. "Emma," he said, his voice low, "you've become necessary to me. Not just in the way you navigate my world, but in the way you've entered my life. I can't pretend I don't want this, us." Emma's eyes met his, unwavering and confident. "I want this too," she said softly. "I don't know what it means for the future, but I'm willing to take the risk. And Dominic, I think you are too." Their fingers intertwined, a symbol of trust and defiance, a quiet declaration that despite the dangers and uncertainties, they would face what came next together. For Dominic, it was a revelation. He had allowed himself to care, to trust, and to desire someone wholly, not as a tool, a companion, or a distraction, but as Emma, herself, unfiltered and extraordinary. As the city lights shimmered below, Dominic realized that their story had only begun. The challenges ahead would be formidable: rivals, family pressures, and the volatile world he commanded, but for the first time, he was willing to embrace the unexpected, to navigate the unknown, and to let Emma stand beside him. She was the last person anyone expected, yet she had become the one he could no longer imagine living without. The calm after the wedding was deceptive. Dominic had hoped that the celebrations were the most challenging part of introducing Emma to his world, but danger had a way of creeping in when least expected. A rival faction in the city had been quietly observing Dominic's operations, and the sudden appearance of Emma, an outsider who had captured his attention and, by extension, his focus, was enough to provoke suspicion and resentment. Dominic knew that anyone in his world who noticed vulnerability would exploit it, and Emma's growing presence in his life was exactly that, a vulnerability he was unwilling to ignore. Emma, despite her courage and intelligence, was entering a world she barely understood. She had proven her mettle during the wedding, navigating the scrutiny of Dominic's family with grace and confidence, but now she faced something entirely different. Dominic's empire was built on fear, loyalty, and precise control, and even the slightest misstep could unleash chaos. He had tried to shield her, keeping her close but cautious, but Emma had a way of insisting on being fully present, refusing to be sidelined. And Dominic, for all his power, found that he couldn't bring himself to stop her. It began with a subtle threat, a message delivered to Dominic's office by a trusted courier, a simple note written in sharp, deliberate handwriting: "Leave her out of it, or the consequences will be yours." Dominic crumpled the paper in his hand, his jaw tightening. He was used to threats, of course, but this one carried a personal weight he couldn't ignore. Emma wasn't just an ally in his life, she had become a part of his heart, a force he couldn't risk losing. And now, someone wanted to leverage that connection against him. He called Emma immediately, his voice low and tense. "Emma, I need you to stay somewhere safe for a while. I can't risk your safety." Emma's response was calm but firm. "Dominic, I've been in this world with you since the wedding. I'm not hiding. If danger comes, I face it with you, not away from you." Dominic clenched his fist, torn between his instinct to protect her and his admiration for her bravery. "You don't understand. This isn't just business. People in my world, they won't hesitate to hurt anyone they think is expendable. And I'm not expendable," she said quietly, her gaze unwavering. "Not to you, not to me." Her words hit him harder than any threat ever could. Dominic had spent years commanding fear, respect, and loyalty, yet Emma's presence reminded him that real strength didn't always come from dominance. It came from courage, honesty, and the willingness to stand beside someone even when everything was at risk. That night, Dominic escorted her to a secluded apartment he kept for emergencies, a space far removed from the prying eyes of both family and enemies. The room was modest but secure, a sanctuary in the chaos of his life. Emma entered with the same calm confidence she displayed everywhere else, surveying the space and nodding once, approvingly. "This is safe enough," she said, her tone light but measured. "I trust your judgment, Dominic. But I also trust myself." Dominic's chest tightened. He was used to being in control, to having all variables accounted for, yet Emma had become the most unpredictable factor in his life. And for the first time, he didn't want to control her, he wanted her presence, her strength, her honesty. He realized that she had become indispensable, not just emotionally, but as someone who challenged him to see the world differently, to feel deeply, and to embrace risk in a way he hadn't dared for years. As the evening unfolded, they talked. Not about business, not about threats, not about danger, but about themselves. Emma shared fragments of her life, her ambitions, her fears, and her hopes, and Dominic listened, captivated. He found himself revealing pieces of himself he rarely allowed anyone to see, the loneliness behind his power, the weight of responsibility, and the rare moments when he allowed himself to imagine a life beyond control and fear. At one point, Emma reached out, placing a hand on his arm. "Dominic," she said softly, "I know this world is dangerous, and I know you want to protect me. But part of being strong isn't hiding from danger, it's facing it with the people you care about." Her words lingered in the room, a challenge and a promise all at once. Dominic felt something shift inside him, a mix of fear, admiration, and desire. He had never been faced with someone who refused to be intimidated, who demanded equality in both heart and mind. And now, he realized that he didn't want her to be afraid, he wanted her to stand beside him, fully, unapologetically. The following days were tense. Dominic moved swiftly to neutralize the threat, contacting trusted lieutenants, gathering intelligence, and preparing for any potential confrontation. Emma, ever present and unflinching, assisted in ways he didn't expect, observing patterns, questioning assumptions, and offering insights that revealed a strategic mind he hadn't anticipated. She wasn't just a companion, she was an asset, a partner, and someone who had earned his trust in ways few ever could. Late one night, after the immediate threat had been contained, Dominic found Emma on the balcony of the emergency apartment, staring out at the city lights. He joined her silently, the air between them charged with unspoken emotion. "You're incredible," he said finally, his voice low, almost vulnerable. "I've never met anyone like you. You don't fear me, you don't try to manipulate me, and you challenge me in ways I didn't know I needed." Emma turned to him, her gaze steady and unwavering. "Dominic, you don't have to be afraid to let someone in. I'm not here to change you. I'm here to be with you. That's all I ask." Dominic felt a pull he couldn't resist. He leaned closer, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and in that moment, the chaos, the danger, and the uncertainties of his world faded away. All that remained was the connection between them, a bond forged in courage, trust, and a willingness to embrace the unexpected. And as they stood together, the city sprawling beneath them like a sea of possibilities, Dominic realized that Emma had become more than the last person anyone expected. She had become the one person he couldn't imagine living without, the one presence that made risk feel worth it, and the one force that could truly challenge the man who had never allowed himself to be vulnerable. For the first time, Dominic Moretti understood that some surprises weren't threats, they were opportunities. And Emma Carlyle was the greatest opportunity of all. The calm after the threat was fleeting. Dominic had barely begun to relax when new complications emerged, subtle but insistent, like shadows stretching in unexpected directions. His enemies were patient. They knew he was distracted, and the appearance of Emma, an intelligent, fearless, and utterly unpredictable force in his life, was exactly the leverage they needed. Dominic sensed it in the sharp glances of some new faces in the city, the whispers in rooms he thought secure, and the quiet tension in the air that he could feel but not immediately trace. Every move he made now had to consider not just the safety of his empire, but the safety of Emma, who had grown inseparable from him. Emma, unfazed as always, had begun to navigate his world with surprising ease. She wasn't just a companion or a guest, she was becoming someone who could hold her own in Dominic's universe, offering insights, warnings, and perspectives he hadn't considered. She asked questions no one else dared, observed interactions with sharp clarity, and even challenged Dominic when he made assumptions that bordered on arrogance. He found it both frustrating and irresistible. This woman had a way of making him question himself while also inspiring a deep, protective desire he could not ignore. That evening, Dominic arranged a meeting at one of his private clubs, a place hidden from the public eye and built for both discretion and strategy. Emma accompanied him, dressed simply but elegantly, and he noted how she seemed to command respect without even trying. As they walked through the club's dimly lit halls, Dominic felt the familiar stirrings of something he hadn't felt in years, vulnerability coupled with fascination. Emma had entered his life and unsettled it completely, and he was powerless to resist the pull she had created. The meeting itself was tense. Several of Dominic's lieutenants gathered around a polished oak table, discussing recent intelligence and potential threats. Emma listened quietly at first, observing patterns, reading expressions, and noting subtle inconsistencies. Dominic noticed how her attention to detail was uncanny, how her mind worked in ways that mirrored his own strategic thinking. When he glanced at her, he realized she was no longer just someone he admired, she had become essential to his decision-making process. As the discussion progressed, one of his lieutenants brought up the rival faction that had recently made a move against Dominic's empire. Normally, Dominic would handle it alone, issuing orders and executing plans without question. But Emma leaned forward, her voice calm yet assertive. If we anticipate their patterns, they'll predict our response. We need a diversion, something they won't expect, and we must protect any vulnerable parties in the process. Dominic's eyes met hers, and he felt a surge of pride and awe. She was suggesting strategies that rivaled his own, clear, decisive, and unexpectedly daring. He realized she wasn't just part of his life, she was becoming integral to his survival, his empire, and his ability to navigate the increasingly treacherous waters of his world. Later that night, after the meeting, Dominic escorted Emma back to the safety of the apartment he had arranged for her. The city was quiet, but the tension in the air was palpable. He closed the door behind them and turned to her, his expression a mixture of admiration and concern. Emma, I can't let you face this world alone. It's dangerous. People will exploit any weakness, and I can't bear the thought of losing you. Emma stepped closer, her eyes meeting his without hesitation. Dominic, I'm not weak. I'm not afraid, and I trust you, but I also trust myself. If we're going to navigate this together, I need to be fully present, not hidden behind safety. Her words were a challenge and an invitation, and Dominic felt the tension between them grow. He had never met anyone who refused to be cowed by his world, and the effect was electrifying. For the first time in his life, he wanted someone not because he needed control, but because he craved the connection, the equality, and the unpredictability she brought. That night, as they stood on the balcony overlooking the city, Dominic couldn't resist the magnetic pull between them. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and she leaned into his touch. The air between them was charged, a mix of desire, trust, and the unspoken understanding that their connection was both dangerous and undeniable. Dominic, Emma said softly, her voice trembling slightly despite her composed demeanor, whatever comes next, we face it together. No secrets, no games. Just us. Dominic nodded, his hand finding hers. Agreed, he whispered, feeling a vulnerability he rarely allowed. Together. In the days that followed, Dominic and Emma worked side by side, preparing for the inevitable confrontation with his rivals. They coordinated strategies, reinforced alliances, and ensured that every angle was covered. Dominic marveled at how naturally she adapted to his world, how her presence sharpened his own instincts, and how their growing intimacy only strengthened their partnership. Yet, amid the strategic planning and quiet moments of connection, there was always an undercurrent of tension. Dominic's enemies were patient, calculating, and relentless, and the risk to Emma's safety was constant. Every glance, every gesture, every shared moment carried the weight of potential consequences. And Dominic, for all his power and control, realized he could no longer separate his emotions from the stakes at hand. One evening, as they reviewed plans in the dim light of Dominic's office, Emma leaned back, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of amusement and challenge. You know, Dominic, for someone who controls everything, you're surprisingly easy to read when it comes to me. Dominic raised an eyebrow, a smirk tugging at his lips. Is that so? Emma nodded. Yes, you care, more than you're willing to admit. And it makes you reckless in the best possible way. Her words sent a shiver through him. He had never allowed anyone to see that side of him, his vulnerabilities, his desires, his attachments, but Emma had. She had not only seen through him, she had become a part of the very thing he tried to keep untouchable, his heart. As the night deepened, Dominic felt an urge to close the distance between them, to acknowledge the connection that had been building since the wedding. He moved closer, and this time, there was no hesitation. Their foreheads touched, breaths mingling, and the tension that had been simmering between them finally ignited. Emma, he whispered, you're the last person anyone expected to change my life, but you have. Completely. Emma's lips curved into a soft smile. And you're the first person I've ever trusted to let me in fully, Dominic. Let's see where this takes us, danger, risk, and all. In that moment, Dominic realized that their bond was more than attraction or fascination. It was trust, partnership, and a willingness to face uncertainty together. For Dominic Moretti, the Mafia boss who had ruled with power and fear, Emma had become a force that challenged every rule he had ever lived by. And for the first time, he welcomed the chaos she brought, not as a threat, but as a promise of something more. The city outside was alive with possibility, danger, and secrets, but Dominic and Emma had discovered something even more powerful: each other. And in a world where trust was rare and loyalty often bought, that bond was the most dangerous, and the most exhilarating, force of all. The city never slept, and neither did the tension that had been building around Dominic Moretti and Emma Carlisle. The days after the wedding had brought both closeness and peril, a delicate balance of desire and danger. Dominic knew that their enemies were patient, calculating, and merciless, and every step they took together had to be measured. Yet the pull between him and Emma was irresistible, a force stronger than strategy, threats, or even loyalty. For Dominic, the stakes were no longer just his empire, they were Emma, and he could not allow anything to harm her. It began with a tip-off from a trusted lieutenant. A rival faction, seeking to destabilize Dominic's influence, had orchestrated a trap, targeting both him and anyone close to him. Dominic immediately understood the gravity of the situation. The attack wasn't random. It was precise, personal, and designed to exploit the one weakness he had developed over the past weeks: Emma. The thought of her in danger ignited a fire within him, a protective instinct he had never felt so intensely. "Emma," he said quietly, his voice tense as he took her hand in his, "you need to trust me. This is dangerous, and I can't let anything happen to you." Emma's eyes met his, calm and unflinching. "Dominic, I trust you. But we face this together. I won't be hidden away, and I won't be treated like a liability. If we survive this, it's because we both fight." Dominic's chest tightened at her courage. She wasn't just fearless. She was unwavering in a way that challenged him, inspired him, and made him realize he wanted more than just companionship, he wanted partnership. He nodded, acknowledging both the danger and the bond they shared, and together, they prepared for what was coming. The confrontation was sudden. A warehouse on the outskirts of the city became the stage for a showdown that Dominic had anticipated but still couldn't fully control. Shadows danced across crates and shipping containers, the air thick with tension and the faint scent of danger. Dominic moved with lethal precision, his senses honed by years of experience, while Emma followed closely, aware of the risks but unfazed. She had learned to read his movements, anticipate threats, and remain composed even when bullets and chaos surrounded them. As rival operatives emerged, the room erupted into a storm of motion, shouts, footsteps, and the sharp cracks of gunfire. Dominic's instincts took over, guiding him through the chaos with ruthless efficiency. But even as he neutralized threats, his attention remained on Emma. Every time she moved, every glance she gave, reminded him of the stakes: her life, her courage, and the trust she had placed in him. He realized that for all his power, he had never felt so vulnerable, so alive, or so connected to another human being. Emma, for her part, was extraordinary. She moved with awareness, ducking behind cover, assisting Dominic with tactical observations, and even disarming a would-be assailant in a moment of improvisation that left him momentarily stunned. She wasn't just surviving, she was thriving in a world designed to intimidate, a world he had ruled for decades. Dominic found himself watching her, admiration mixing with something far deeper, as he realized she had become indispensable, not just in this moment, but in his life. The battle reached its climax when Dominic confronted the faction's leader, a man who had underestimated both Dominic and Emma. Words were unnecessary. The tension, the history, and the stakes spoke for themselves. Dominic's presence was commanding, but it was Emma's quick thinking and courage that turned the tide. Together, they neutralized the threat, a seamless partnership born of trust, courage, and an unspoken bond that had been forged over weeks of danger and proximity. When the dust settled, Dominic and Emma stood amidst the remnants of the confrontation, breathing heavily, adrenaline coursing through their veins. He looked at her, noticing the faint smudge of dirt on her cheek, the sparkle of determination in her eyes, and the sheer intensity of her presence. She had not only survived but had stood beside him as an equal, proving her strength, intelligence, and fearlessness. "Emma," he said, his voice low and filled with emotion, "I don't just admire you, I need you. In a way I've never needed anyone before." Emma stepped closer, her hand brushing against his, her eyes unwavering. "Dominic, I've never been afraid of danger, but I've never felt more alive than when I'm with you. We face the world together, and whatever comes next, we face it as equals." In that moment, the realization struck Dominic with undeniable clarity. Emma was no longer just the last person anyone expected, she had become the center of his world. She had challenged him, inspired him, and unlocked parts of his heart he had long thought unreachable. And he knew, without hesitation, that he would risk everything to protect her, to honor their bond, and to embrace the unpredictability of the life they could share. The following days brought a different kind of tension, the subtle navigation of victory and aftermath. Dominic and Emma returned to the city, aware that their enemies would regroup, that the world of the Morettis would demand loyalty, and that every step would carry the weight of consequences. Yet, they were no longer just individuals in the same space, they were a unit, a force that combined intellect, courage, and unshakable trust. Every glance, every touch, every shared moment reinforced the truth. Together, they were stronger, more capable, and undeniably connected. One evening, as they stood on the balcony of Dominic's penthouse overlooking the city lights, the chaos and danger faded into the background. Dominic pulled Emma close, feeling the steady beat of her heart against his, and realized that for the first time, he didn't feel the need to control everything around him. He had learned that some forces, unexpected, challenging, and utterly captivating, could not be tamed, only embraced. "You've changed my life, Emma," he whispered, his lips brushing her ear. "You've made me see that the last person anyone expects can become the most important person in the world." Emma smiled, her hand resting on his chest. "And you've shown me that even in a world of danger and power, love, trust, and connection are worth the risk." Dominic's lips met hers, a kiss that was tender yet charged with the intensity of everything they had faced together. It was a promise, a declaration, and a recognition of the bond they had forged, one built not on fear or obligation, but on courage, honesty, and mutual respect. As they stood together, the city alive beneath them, Dominic realized that the chaos of his world had brought him something he had never expected, someone who could challenge him, inspire him, and stand beside him through danger and uncertainty. Emma was that person, and he knew that their story was only beginning. In the heart of New York, amidst power, threats, and the unpredictable turns of life, Dominic Moretti and Emma Carlisle had found something rare, a connection forged in trust, strengthened by courage, and undeniable in its intensity. The last person anyone expected had become the one person Dominic could no longer imagine living without. And together, they were unstoppable, ready to face whatever the future held, side by side.